Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of July the 4th and 5th, 2026. So happy birthday, United States of America. United States is celebrating its 250th birthday this weekend, and in this video I will be looking at the astrology of the United States. I want to have a look at the United States' horoscope, and additionally the horoscope of Donald Trump. I don't want to spend too much time looking at Trump's chart, but it is a special day for America, or special weekend for America, you could say. And so, it just does seem that I have a certain obligation to look at the astrology of this country where I am currently living. But I'm also going to be looking at the 12 signs, and I'm going to be looking at the overall astrological picture this weekend. So here is the chart for the weekend, set for midnight on Sunday, July the 5th. And you can see that the moon is in Pisces at around sort of 11 Pisces, halfway through the weekend. So this weekend the moon moves into Pisces at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday, London time. So that would be sort of 8:30 a.m. on most of sort of continental Europe. If you're in the Americas, then the moon moves into Pisces, very early in the morning on Saturday. In fact, if you're in California, it will be sort of late on Friday that the moon moves into Pisces. So, moon in Pisces weekend. Now, the last time the moon was in Pisces, Jupiter was in Cancer. So there was a mutual reception between the moon and Jupiter. But of course, now Jupiter has moved into Leo. We don't have that mutual reception anymore. So, all things being equal, the moon in Pisces is not quite as fortunate as it used to be, while we had Jupiter in Cancer over the last year. But still, I think that, Jupiter in Pisces is, quite a sensitive sign. It's a sign that is ruled by Pisces. And so if you want to enjoy yourself over the weekend, you want to have a fun time, then you could say that that's a great placement for the moon. But of course, we do have to consider what aspects the moon is making. And while the moon moves through Pisces, we of course have a conjunction between Mars and Uranus. So this Mars-Uranus conjunction has been getting closer and closer over the last few days, and now on Saturday it is exact. Here it is at 3. Well, this is at 3 for Gemini, but the exact Mars-Uranus conjunction is it's at the beginning of a weekend, US time. And so with this exact Mars-Uranus conjunction, it does potentially stir things up. And it could well stir things up for the US, as I will be sort of discussing a bit later. It's quite a violent conjunction. It can be about explosions, bangs, revolutions, and so on. And so it needs to be treated with a certain amount of respect. And on Saturday, the moon in Pisces makes a square to Uranus and a square to Mars. So you could say that Uranus-Mars conjunction, is really triggered this weekend by the moon, especially on Saturday, and then the moon having made that square to Mars and Uranus, it moves towards a trine of the Sun, and that's just a much easier aspect. So having the moon in Pisces, Sun in Cancer, 2 water signs. It's almost kind of relaxing. It's not very dynamic. Perhaps we don't want anything too dynamic. We've got enough dynamism with the Mars-Uranus conjunction, and as the moon makes that trine to the sun, there's an opportunity for things to calm down. And so, if there's a bit of instability on Saturday, perhaps later in the weekend, as we move into Sunday, we can start to maybe stabilize the situation. And with the moon and the sun both in the water signs, perhaps it's a time when we shouldn't be talking too much. I mean, we've got Mars-Uranus both in Gemini, and that can just be too much, too many words, too many angry words. And we perhaps need to just bide our time and not feel that we have to comment on everything. And there may be times when we just have to just keep our thoughts and our feelings to ourselves. It doesn't mean to say that we're repressing our feelings. I mean, why should we repress our feelings with the moon in Pisces and the sun in Cancer? We can be aware of our feelings. We can perhaps let other people be aware of our feelings. But do we have to talk too much? I don't think we do. Now, Mars is not just making a conjunction to Uranus. It's also making a sextile to Neptune and a trine to Pluto. So if you look at this chart, there's Neptune at 4 degrees Aries, Pluto at 4 degrees Aquarius, and Mars at 4 degrees Gemini. So that is quite a spectacular configuration in a way. Having Uranus, Neptune, and Mars all on the same degree. I mean, you could see that as perhaps being Neptune on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. That's one way of looking at it. Neptune on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. That actually sounds a bit dangerous, Neptune on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. Mars-Pluto is about being quite powerful, asserting our power. So with Neptune on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, that could be using subtle methods to get our way. We don't have to be direct. We can just assert ourselves, in a very slow, subtle, perhaps quite emotionally manipulative way, and we can then start to have an influence. Okay, it might not be us doing the assertion. It might be someone else, and additionally, we have semi-sextile between Mercury and Venus. Okay, perhaps quite a minor aspect, but with Mercury and Venus, as a pair, Mercury and Venus can be quite artistic. They can be very creative. You could say that Mercury. Well, we've got Mercury in Cancer, Venus in Leo, but perhaps the challenge here is to find a way of expressing our creativity, and it might not be entirely easy. We might feel that we're not getting enough attention. Venus in Leo wants attention, but Mercury in Cancer Mercury's retrograde in Cancer. We're trying to get the words out, but it's not always easy. And before I talk about the United States, of course, I want to just look at a couple of other things. I wanted to just look at the horoscope. If we set the horoscope for the weekend for Sydney, Australia. So if we set this horoscope for Sydney, Australia at midnight, halfway through the weekend, the moon is at 3 degrees Pisces. So this tells us that if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia for the first part of the weekend, I don't know, up until about, say, late afternoon on Saturday, the moon will be moving through late Aquarius. And the moon will, I think, be void of course late Aquarius. So if you are in Australasia, it may be the case that right at the beginning of a weekend you just might not feel that much is going on until Saturday, up until maybe and up until the late afternoon. you may be wondering, what exactly is going on, and it might all feel a little bit unsatisfactory. But don't worry. By the end of Saturday, I think that things do start moving. And then there is the heliocentric picture. So here it is. We have a T-square heliocentrically over the weekend. So we've got Jupiter opposition Pluto, like we had yesterday and over the last couple of days. This Jupiter-Pluto aspect has been forming. It's still pretty close, and Venus is on the T. So Venus at 4, Jupiter at 4, Pluto at 4. Yeah, it does feel that something's going on. I mean, so Jupiter-Pluto, as I've been saying, is about just not being happy with the way things are. We want to put more energy into the situation because we just want it to be as good as possible, and we want to have an influence. We perhaps want to apply ourselves. Maybe we want to apply force. Okay, Mars is separating from that. Mars was making a square to Jupiter and Pluto, but I think it's 4 degrees off. So we've still got this sort of grand cross formation here: Pluto opposition Jupiter, Venus opposition Mars, and so this configuration, particularly as Jupiter Pluto is involved, about just wanting more and wanting to have an influence, wanting to be taken seriously, and just not being satisfied with the second best. And so you tie this in with the geocentric Mars-Uranus conjunction, and you might then have a weekend that could be quite powerful, could be quite heavy. Maybe there are certain people who are throwing their weight around. And so now I want to look at the United States. Now, my view of the United States, or rather the way I'm going to be looking at the United States, is probably going to be a bit chaotic. There have been sort of certain things that I had sort of wanted to look at, and they might all seem a bit random, but I've got to say something about the United States, haven't I? I mean, it is the July the 4th weekend, and the starting point has to be the Mars-Uranus conjunction. And so here is this Mars-Uranus conjunction. Yeah, I know I've already talked about it, but the thing about this Mars-Uranus conjunction is that a lot of astrologers are getting really excited about it, and they're excited about it in the context of the United States, because it really emphasizes the Uranus in Gemini side of things. And as we know, when Uranus goes into Gemini, the United States tends to find itself at war. Uranus was in Gemini during the War of Independence. It was in Gemini during the Civil War, during the Second World War. It was in Taurus at the time of Pearl Harbor, but it soon went into Gemini. And of course now Uranus is in Gemini as well. And so we're thinking war. Is the United States going to find itself at war? Is it going to find itself at war over the next year, for example? Now, when you've got this kind of pattern, when you start to see a pattern forming, it's tempting to just think it's going to repeat. But a problem with astrology, I think a particular problem with astrology is that I've noticed is that as soon as you start to see a pattern, the pattern often breaks down, and you could argue that there is a statistical issue here. That what a lot of people do with astrology is they have some charts, and they try to look for as many things in common which those charts have. And if you look at a set of charts, and you look at different things, you're always going to find something. Statistically, you will always find something, because you're just doing so many statistical tests. Does this chart have Mars conjunct Uranus? Does this chart have Venus square Neptune? You're going to find something in the end. And so you get very excited when you found a common factor. But of course, in fact, you will always find a common factor. And you put it for a statistical test, it looks good. But the trouble is, in statistics, there is this thing called the multiple comparison effect. And if you compare things a lot, you have to adjust the probabilities. And so I know it sounds impressive to say that the last 3 times that there was a Mars-Uranus conjunction, there was war, but it just could be what I think is said in statistics is an overfitted solution. And maybe this time round, Uranus, this time round, United States will not find itself at war. I mean, I know that we've got the potential for war here. We've got Iran, and also we've got Ukraine. As I've said in previous videos, I think the situation in Ukraine is arguably more worrying than the situation in Iran, in my opinion. But there's certainly the potential there. So this Mars-Uranus conjunction just should not be neglected, and the influence of Mars, just keeps cropping up. So, when Donald Trump was inaugurated as president, here is where's his inauguration chart? So, when he was inaugurated president, Mars was exactly on the IC. And, I looked at that. I said, Mars on the IC. It kind of seemed strange at the time, because everyone thought when Trump became president that he was going to turn over a new leaf. He wasn't sort of a neocon. He wasn't going to get involved in these forever wars. He was just going to focus on America and building America up and the American economy and making America great and America first and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of strange that Mars was on the IC here. But as we've discovered, in spite of his good intentions, or apparently good intentions, he certainly got himself involved in a conflict with Iran, and he tried to keep a distance from Ukraine. But I don't know if he's doing a particularly good job here, though some would say that this Mars conjunct Uranus is nothing to do with foreign adventures and is more to do with the conflict at home. Now, I must make it clear, I'm not here to give an opinion on Donald Trump. I'm just stating things as I see it. I'm not here to say how wonderful he is or say how terrible he is. I'm just pointing this out, that that Mars Uranus on the IC could represent conflict at home. And you've got all the stuff about ICE and tariffs and so forth, and certainly the United States is a divided society. Now, if Kamala Harris had have won in the 2024 election, and she had been inaugurated president on January the 20th, 2025, Mars would still have been on the IC. So we shouldn't personalize this to Trump. This was, in a way, the destiny of whoever was going to be elected president in this year. It was kind of inevitable. And as far as the United States is concerned, we are thinking about the United States' 250th anniversary, and so I think we do need to look at this chart. So here's the USA's chart, and you can see from this USA chart why people have been so concerned about this Mars-Uranus conjunction, or particularly Uranus moving into Gemini, because this is a chart that astrologers tend to use, and you've got Gemini on the descendant, and so Uranus, every time Uranus moves through the setting sign, that's when America has found itself at war, and so Uranus is getting closer and closer to the United States is descendant. But this Mars-Uranus conjunction is at 3 degrees Gemini, so it's not quite there yet. If you want a really impressive Mars-Uranus conjunction, then probably you should jump 2 years. The conjunction that is perhaps incredibly worrying is the Mars-Uranus conjunction in 2 years' time. So on June the 23rd, 2028, there is a Mars-Uranus conjunction at 11.5 degrees Gemini. Now that conjunction, that's going to be fun. So if you look at the USA's chart, with its descendant at 12 degrees 13 Gemini, so the June the 23rd Mars-Uranus conjunction in 2 years' time, just under 2 years' time, is right on United States' descendant. So you might say that means that maybe the United States will be able to avoid war for the time being. And when we say war, I mean, I'm talking about sort of a major war. This thing with Iran or even Ukraine doesn't so far categorize itself as a kind of war that we're thinking about, something sort of global, which perhaps is a threat to the US. Although, the interesting thing about the US and war is that the War of Independence was essential to the United States' identity, but in the Civil War, yeah. But the World War II. Okay, it's true that a couple of the Aleutian Islands were occupied by the Japanese, but the United States wasn't really under direct threat. I mean, the war that really was a threat to the United States was the 1812 war, when the British burnt down the White House. But Mars and Uranus, when Uranus was not in Gemini in 1812. But yeah, so the 2028 is kind of more serious for now with that Mars-Uranus conjunction. So this Mars-Uranus conjunction, it's certainly a theme that we need to be perhaps concerned with, especially as the United States has a wide Mars-Uranus conjunction in its own chart in Gemini. And another aspect that the United States has is a square between the Sun and Saturn. So I regard that Saturn in Libra as being really strong. I mean, that Saturn in Libra in America's chart is, assuming this chart is right, I mean, it just kind of works so well. I mean, Saturn is in the right place. It's exalted in Libra. It's not retrograde. It's a male planet. It's above the horizon. It's in a masculine sign. It's just perfect, that Saturn in Libra. And Saturn, you think about the government, you think about the constitution and how the country has been brought together. So whatever you think of the United States, the reality is that it has stayed around. You look at France, which is on its fifth republic. It's on its fifth constitution. The United States is still on its first. You still have a rule of law. The country hasn't collapsed. Okay, there was a civil war. Okay, there's a lot of negativity about the United States, but it's always, the grass is always greener. Everyone is negative about the country in which they're living. I mean, that's just the way it is. But the point is, the governmental system in the US and the Constitution, like it or not, has worked extremely well. Certainly relative to most other countries, and I think that is reflected by the Saturn in Libra, and the Sun is square Saturn in Libra. That's Sun square Saturn. That's quite a scary aspect, but maybe it's working. Maybe it's this sort of the state. Some of the old coins some of the old American coins, I think it was, I forget what they were called, was it I know what they were called, the Gemini, no, there was a series of dimes, which I think they were first minted in around 1913, the beginning of the century, and those first dimes, they had the fasces on them. The fasces was the bundle of woods with the axe, a symbol of fascism, not fascism in the sort of a Mussolini sense of a word, but fascism in the Roman sense of a word. The power of the state, and you might see that in terms of the sun square Saturn. No, sorry, they were called I think they were called the Mercury dimes. I think that's what they were called, and they did have a fasces symbol on them, and so maybe that's sun square Saturn. So why am I saying this? Well, I think that this sun square Saturn is quite relevant now. I mean, here is the United States' solar return. So here's its solar return for 2026, and set for sort of Philadelphia. I mean, that's where the capital was, I think, at the time. And the sun is at 13 degrees 19 Cancer, and it's making a square to Saturn. So the United States was born with sun square Saturn. It now has sun square Saturn again. Saturn was in Libra on July the 4th, 1776. It's now moving towards 14 degrees 14 degrees Aries. So that Saturn is being kind of triggered in quite a major way, and the fact that Saturn is so close to the opposition of the United States' natal Saturn at the time of the solar return, and of course it's all bound up with the sun, really might indicate that potentially this is quite a difficult time for the United States. Sun square Saturn. It might be that the system of government is under pressure. Okay, I know that critics of Donald Trump are suggesting he's pushing things too far. He's trying too hard to establish his control. I'm not going to comment on that. But there may be a number of ways in which the Constitution and the separation of powers is under pressure, and it may, of course, say something about the experience of America, the United States, over the next year, as Saturn goes retrograde. When does Saturn goes retrograde? Saturn goes retrograde on July the 26th. So Saturn goes retrograde at 14 degrees 45 Aries. So it goes retrograde almost exactly opposition the United States' Saturn in Libra. In fact, Saturn is already slowing down. And if we take that precise chart, that chart for the moment Saturn goes retrograde, it's kind of interesting that we see Uranus on the descendant. So Uranus on the descendant seems to be a signature that seems to be coming up quite a lot at the moment. Uranus on the descendant could represent America's enemies. It could represent a general sort of discontent. Of course, Mars is in the 7th house as well. So those are a few thoughts about America, United States, and its solar return. These are themes I will be returning to. I just thought I just needed to say something about the United States at the moment. And if we think about that Uranus on the descendant as a signature, we should perhaps be thinking about Donald Trump's chart. So Donald Trump has just had his 80th birthday. And I know that some of you are really bored of Donald Trump's chart. That's the great thing about having chapters on these videos. If you are not interested in what I've got to say about Trump or America or whatever, you can just move to the 12 signs. So here's Donald Trump's chart, and so I'll be looking at his solar return in a moment. But one thing about Donald Trump is, if you are into whole signs, I know that the whole sign house system, has become popular over the last few decades. And so if you use the whole sign house system, you would then say, well, Jupiter has just moved into Leo, so that means that Jupiter has moved into Donald Trump's first house. JD Vance, who I'll be looking at in a moment, he's also got Leo rising. So both the president and the vice president have Jupiter moving into their rising signs, and I think that might be interesting. That certainly could be significant. And as far as Trump's chart is concerned, I've looked at his solar return quite recently, and just to have another look at Trump's solar return, here it is. So Trump's solar return, set for New York, where he was born, Jamaica, New York. Uranus is on the descendant, exactly on the descendant. Completely exactly on the descendant. Now, if you set that solar return for Washington, D.C., I think that's where he was at his birthday, you'd still have Uranus pretty close to the descendant. So it doesn't change that much. But, remembering that chart I was talking about with, talking about the chart of Saturn going retrograde, that moment when Saturn goes retrograde, Uranus is on the descendant. So this theme does crop up again, and so I think that Trump's Uranus on the descendant is just worrying, and just one wonders how it's going to manifest. Is it America finding itself at war? It could be that he's vulnerable. He's vulnerable, to attack. That's one way of looking at it. And that solar return has the moon, pretty close to Uranus. So it's definitely something that we need to be thinking about. And of course, the Sun is opposition true black moon Lilith, and his converse solar return. I've looked at his converse solar return before, but so that doing a solar return for 80 years before he was born. That's also disturbing. And so the converse return set for 80 years before he was born, 1866, has Saturn on his descendant, Mars on his ascendant, and Mars on his ascendant, Saturn on his descendant, and in fact it's got a sort of a T-square. You've got Jupiter at 1 degree Aquarius, square Mars, Jupiter square Saturn. And I don't know whether you can look at transits, but of course Jupiter has just moved into Leo, so maybe Jupiter's movement into Leo is kind of triggering his whole sort of converse solar return. So looking at these two solar returns, there is this indication that something is going on with Trump. And okay, I did say that I was talking about America, but Trump is the head of state. He's the king. I'm not saying he's the king in a derogatory sense. I'm just looking at it in a medieval sense. He's the head of state. The land is the king, and the king is the land. So goes the land, so goes the king. They're kind of connected. You could say the same with the United Kingdom and Prince Charles, even though he doesn't have much power. Trump's chart is potentially quite disturbing. And I think that all of that is very much of relevance. And when we're talking about this Mars-Uranus conjunction, that it does impact two other prominent Americans. One prominent American who is impacted by the the Mars Uranus conjunction is Barack Obama. So here is Barack Obama's horoscope. I really do think he was born at 7:24 p.m. in Hawaii. I mean, I don't really go for other theories. His birth certificate is his birth certificate. Now, the thing about Barack Obama's horoscope is that he has his moon at 3 degrees 21 Gemini. So the Mars-Uranus conjunction taking place on July the 4th is right on Barack Obama's moon. And it's pretty close to his IC as well, but it's the fact that it's on his moon. And Barack Obama has Uranus on his descendant as well. So there's a kind of a Uranus descendant feeling to Barack Obama as well. So this Uranus on the descendant, this theme. I don't know what's going on with Barack Obama. I mean, he's not president anymore. He doesn't have any formal power. Obviously, he can work behind the scenes in democratic circles. And, even if this Mars-Uranus conjunction was on his moon, was having a dramatic impact on him, I mean, would we know about it? I mean, obviously, he's got to be careful how he goes. I mean, the moon may represent the women in his life, may say something about his relationship with Michelle. I don't know what's going on with him and Michelle Obama. I don't know, but we might want to think about that. Someone who is more important, though, is JD Vance, and here is JD Vance's horoscope. So JD Vance, like Donald Trump, has Leo rising. So that means that Jupiter is moving into his whole sign, into his whole sign first house. So Jupiter's moving into a sign where he has the Sun, where he has his Venus. Maybe this is going to potentially work well for JD Vance. I mean, I know that JD Vance has got a lot of criticism recently. A lot of people really obviously can't stand JD Vance. I'm not quite sure why people have such a problem with him. And I know people are now saying that he's kind of blown it for being the presidential candidate in 2028, that Rubio has kind of stolen his thunder. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced about that, but I haven't looked at it, astrologically. But the thing about JD Vance is he has his North Node at 4 degrees 10 Gemini. He also has his moon at 19 degrees 25 Libra. So that means his North Node, when I say North Node, I'm talking about the true North Node. He has his North Node making a sesquiquadrate to his moon. And if you look at the hypotheticals in JD Vance's chart, he has Hades conjunct the North Node in his 10th house, and sesquiquadrate the moon. So with Hades conjunct the North Node, well, it kind of depends on your political perspective, doesn't it? I mean, if you're someone who wants to be critical of JD Vance, he wants to use astrology to undermine him, you might say, oh, Hades on a North Node says something about the people he hangs out with. I mean, a North Node is about social contact. It's you hang out with seedy, sleazy people. Maybe I don't know. In business and politics, who are the people behind JD Vance? So you might want to see it like that. If you want to be more positive about JD Vance, you would say, well, he's got the North Node in the 10th house. Therefore, he is destined to rule. He is destined maybe to be not just vice president, but president as well. He's doing the right thing. He is following his destiny, and it is absolutely right that he is that he's vice president. And the point is that Uranus on his north node, I think, really is important. I mean, Uranus is already on his north node, but so Uranus and Mars on his north node. We don't know what he's doing behind the scenes, but it may be to do with him, negotiating with the Iranians, having contact with the Iranians, and so we don't see it, but so far he's been in the news more because of the Iran conflict, but and the Mars Uranus conjunction is not just on his north node, it's also making a sesquiquadrate to his moon. So I think that this Mars-Uranus conjunction is really sort of stirring things up for JD Vance. So I think he's someone to be watched. And finally, I just wanted to have a look at the chart for the midterms, because we mustn't forget about them. Midterms, November the 3rd. So here's a chart. I've set this for 9 o'clock in the evening on November the 3rd. But I think November the 3rd. That's right. I think November the 3rd is a Tuesday. I think that's when the elections are. Yeah, November the 3rd is a Tuesday. And these midterms are important in terms of who controls Congress. I think I'm right in saying that all the members of the House of Representatives are up for re-election, and so I've set this chart for 9 p.m. not for the opening of polls. This is by 9 p.m. on November 3rd. This is when the results are coming out, and I mean, I'm not going to really read anything into it. I'm not going to make any forecasts. It's kind of interesting that as the results come out, it's of course will be after sunset. Jupiter is in a stronger position than Saturn. Saturn is retrograde at the time of the midterms. Why does that matter? Well, there is a view that Jupiter rules the Republicans and Saturn rules the Democrats. And I mean, it's not the other way around. I mean, some people think, it should be the opposite. It should be the opposite because some people regard the Republicans as being, I don't know, repressive or whatever, and Saturnine or whatever. But really, it's the Democrats that want big government, and sort of big government is surely about Saturn rather than Jupiter. Anyway, that is the tradition, and Jupiter is stronger than Saturn. I mean, Jupiter is in Leo by night. It's in its own triplicity. It rules the fiery triplicity, whereas Saturn in Aries is it's in its fall, and so just on the basis of that, we might be thinking that maybe the Republicans will do better than expected. I know that a lot of people are saying that because of Trump and what he's done, he's kind of messed things up, and he's looking. But Republicans are going to go for a real lining themselves up for a real hammering in November. But this chart maybe suggests that the Republicans might not do so badly. But I'm not making any predictions here. I've only just started to look at the midterm elections, and with these midterm elections, we've got this Mars and Jupiter in Leo. We've got the South Node in Leo. So that's something to think about, by the way. Trump is going to have the South Node transiting his ascendant soon, but he's also got Jupiter moving through his first house. Jupiter pretty close to his ascendant at the time of the midterms. But I will be looking at the midterms in more detail, at a later stage. So that's it with the US for the moment, and now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of July the 4th and 5th, 2026. Aries. The Mars-Uranus conjunction is now exact. It's exact on Saturday. And so you might think, with this conjunction, that now might be the time to take action, or perhaps this might be when everything starts to move. Things get really sort of chaotic. After all, if you think about Mars-Uranus, Mars is your ruler. Uranus is the planet of earthquakes and revolution and general upset. So, it seems to be, rather chaotic and certainly dramatic. But, to an extent, it's up to you how you handle this energy. I'm all in favour of you taking ownership of the Mars-Uranus conjunction, deciding how you want to use it. And, if you can, do something constructive, decide how you want to have an impact, that would be, the right thing to do. But Aries, don't feel that you have to be in the centre of things, throughout the weekend. I don't actually think you do. Okay, the Mars might be conjunct Uranus, but, the moon is in Pisces, and the Pisces is, quite a soft sign, at least from an Aries perspective. You don't have to be doing loads of stuff, all day long. You don't have to, be in the thick of the battle, and, instead, as the Mars-Uranus conjunction becomes exact, you just might feel that, you want to perhaps just do your own thing in your own way. And of course, one way of looking at Mars and Uranus is to say that it's actually quite stubborn. Mars and Uranus, does what it likes, and it doesn't pay too much attention to other people. And so if there's something you want to do in your own way, then just go and do it, and you don't have to feel any great obligation to be sociable. Absolutely not. Usually Aries is seen as being quite a sociable sign, but sometimes you're not really in the mood, and it's actually quite possible that your best work is done, away from the public eye. Yes, that is indeed true, and that might be part of a challenge, of the weekend. So, as the weekend progresses, as the moon moves through Pisces, it moves towards a square of Mars and Uranus. Well, in fact, it makes that square of Mars and Uranus on Saturday. So, in fact, quite early in the weekend, it makes that square, and it just might be with that square that you realise that there are certain things you don't want to reveal. You want to keep them to yourself. And as far as dynamism is concerned, you can be dynamic, you can make things happen, but is it really necessary to show off? Do other people really need to know what you're doing? So I think that that is quite important to realise. And I know that we go on and on about Mars conjunct Uranus, but it's not the only thing going on over the weekend. So Mars having made a conjunction to Uranus, it makes a sextile to Neptune, and it makes a trine to Pluto. So Uranus and Pluto are these two outer planets, and they're quite otherworldly in their own way, and they might represent sort of external energies which may be difficult to verbalize, but you're nonetheless aware of them. And if you were being sort of madly sociable, then you might not understand these energies, which really are very, very fine tuned, and so with Mars sextile Neptune. I mean, Mars sextile Neptune, is quite a sensitive aspect. Yeah, it is fine-tuned. It's perhaps about your feelings and also your intuition. And so you need to be in an environment where your intuition can work. And, how can your intuition possibly work if you're, I don't know, surrounded by other people? I mean, other people will just kind of crowd you out. And then Mars makes a trine to Pluto. And so, Mars trine Pluto certainly is about you wanting to be in control. You're absolutely not in the mood for just following other people's lead. And yes, I think you could be very stubborn with Mars trine Pluto. And it's going to be important that there is a degree of flexibility, not necessarily you being flexible, but other people being flexible. You don't want them to. You don't want people to get in your way. I mean, if there's something you want to do, and so I think you might actually now be getting an idea of how the Mars-Uranus conjunction might actually be working. And if the Mars-Uranus conjunction were to work for example, in a negative way, like you getting annoyed, you getting yourself into trouble, taking on too much, if that were to happen, that might just be because you feel you have to rebel, because you're in a situation where your freedom is being constrained, where you feel rather hemmed in and cornered. And so if you felt like that, you might lash out. And what could make you feel hemmed in? Well, other people might be the problem. But if you give yourself as much freedom as possible, you make sure that there's always an escape route, that you are not forced to stay in one place for too long, then I think that things should be fine, and it actually could be quite a successful weekend, a weekend where you are able to, tune into your own power. And, if you feel something needs to be done, if you feel that it needs to be said, then ideally you should just go ahead and be able to do things on the spur of a moment. And by doing things on the spur of a moment, Aries, I think that you can have quite a powerful impact. Taurus. The moon is moving through Pisces, pretty much all weekend. Let's say, moon moving through Pisces, that's, quite a pleasant sign for the moon to be moving through. I mean, it's not as great as it used to be. I mean, the last time the moon was in Pisces, a month ago, we had Jupiter in Cancer. So when the moon was in Pisces, it was in mutual reception to Jupiter by sign. But I'm afraid, Jupiter's now moved into Leo, so we don't have that mutual reception anymore. But still, I mean, with moon in Pisces, I think that you're able to get into the spirit of things. If you want to have a sociable weekend, if you want to interact with other people, then I think that you should be able to do it very well. And it's not just the fact that the moon is moving through Pisces, it's also making a conjunction to the North Node. So, with the moon making a conjunction to the North Node, that does suggest that, taking into account other people's needs, is the right thing to do. I mean, okay, you don't have to be friendly to everyone, but I think that there are people out there who can do you, a great deal of good, and if you're there for them, I think they will then be there for you. So that does look good, although there might be moments of irritation because the moon in Pisces does make squares to Mars and Uranus on Saturday, and of course we got this Mars-Uranus conjunction, and so there might be moments where certain people are annoying, not everyone is annoying. It just might be some people. If there's any interruption in terms of the smooth flow of social interaction, then that disruption could potentially be exaggerated and blown out of proportion. And I think that you maybe have to be a little careful when it comes to money. I mean, by all means socialize, but if you're mixing socialization with money, discussions about money, questions about money, asking about who's spending what, and is anyone spending too much money, those kind of things can really spoil the fun. And so if you are socializing, it's probably best to steer clear of the financial side of things, and be particularly careful if you and other people are spending money together or are together involved with something of a financial nature, because that is a real recipe for an argument, for disagreement, and that possibility of disagreement, I mean, kind of sort of builds up as the weekend gets underway. And at the end of the weekend, we've got a semi-sextile between Mercury and Venus. So we got Mercury at 25 Cancer, Venus at 25 Leo, so they're 30 degrees apart, and that Mercury might represent a conversation that perhaps goes on for too long, and it starts off fine, talking about stuff, no problem, but then things might get sort of more and more involved, and you realize that something doesn't make sense, that maybe you don't agree with what someone is saying. And if you're in that kind of situation, then you have to work out how best to respond. It might be that you're being told something that you should be taking on board. So just because you hear something that you don't like the sound of, it doesn't mean to say that you should react badly. I think, Taurus, as far as possible, you should try to be reasonable, and give people the benefit of the doubt. And if you're being given advice that you don't like the sound of, maybe just accept the advice. You don't have to follow the advice. And as I sort of said at the beginning of the piece, really, it is the right thing to do, to be friendly and sociable, and you should not be looking for arguments. You should not be looking for disagreements. But still, Taurus, it just does feel that there's something slightly bothering you, over the weekend. You're just not sure how things are going to develop, and you might be worried that they develop in the wrong way. I mean, you'd like to let go. You'd like to just perhaps become part of the festivities. Well, okay, if you're in the United States, it's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So I don't know. Is that a big weekend? Is that an important Saturday? I don't know. It's a kind of a long weekend, isn't it? And so, it would be nice to let go and just to relax, even if you're not in the United States. But there's just something holding you back, and you're not sure. And maybe it's good that you're not sure. Maybe it's good that you're having doubts, provided that these doubts, don't get out of hand. And as far as is possible, Taurus, do think about, who you are spending your time with. As I've kind of already indicated, I mean, some people, they make good company, and you should be giving people a chance. But, some people could be annoying. I mean, don't forget that there is a conjunction between, Mars and Uranus. Mars is ruler of Scorpio. Scorpio is, of course, your opposite sign. And so, with Mars conjunct Uranus, it's just possible that some people might just be a law unto themselves, and in fact they might be, unreasonable. And so if someone has the potential for being unreasonable, then the sooner you become aware of this potential, the better, because it allows you to take, to take appropriate measures. Gemini. We now have this exact conjunction between Mars and Uranus, and I've been talking about it for a few days, and I've taken the view that this conjunction, Gemini, is quite important, and it is in your sign at the beginning of your sign, and so that means that this Mars-Uranus conjunction is going to particularly impact you if you're an early Gemini. So, for example, if you're looking at these horoscopes from the perspective of a sun sign, so if you're born, say, I don't know, between say May the 21st and May the 26th or something like that, you might particularly feel this Mars-Uranus conjunction. Or if your ascendant is I don't know, between 0 and 6 degrees of the sign, or 6-7 degrees, then it could really have quite a powerful impact on you. But whenever you are born, whatever your ascendant, whatever degree of Gemini it is, in whatever the degree of your sun, it's still going to have an influence. And as far as what this Mars-Uranus conjunction is about, I think it's going to make you quite determined. I think that you're going to want to do things in a particular way, and you're going to value your independence, and you're not going to listen too hard to what other people are saying. And it doesn't actually mean that you will necessarily be putting yourself in a conflict situation. So, for example, if something is going on and there is an expectation that you do something and you don't want to do it, it might be, Gemini, that you're not going to make a fuss. You're not going to announce your intention to, I don't know, break your promise or do what other people don't want you to do. You might just quietly just get on and do it, so you just you do things your way. You don't announce it. People only find out about it later, and that's fine. And somehow you might just get away with it. You might be expecting some pushback, but it just might not happen. And so just, Gemini, maybe it's okay to do what you want, and don't talk about it. Just be a free spirit, and in that way you may be avoiding some of the sort of irritation that is often associated with the Mars-Uranus conjunction. And this Mars-Uranus conjunction is squared by the moon in Pisces. That sort of happens on Saturday, and that sounds difficult, doesn't it? Moon square Uranus, moon square Mars. That kind of sounds really dangerous. But maybe, Gemini, it's not such a bad thing. The moon is, after all, not just in Pisces, but it's making a conjunction to a North Node, and this means that in your own way you want to make an impact, and you want to be able to do something of value that is taking you in the right direction. And perhaps this explains why you might be quite stubborn and determined, because I think, Gemini, there is something you want to do, there's something you want to achieve, something you want to work on. And it doesn't matter the fact that it's the weekend, or even July the 4th weekend in the US. That doesn't matter. Not really. because if you've got something else you want to do, something else you want to achieve, then what can stop you? Because this is the kind of weekend it is. It is a time for Geminis to be just really being a free spirit and not feeling that there is any big obstacle. I mean, that might be your view as you come into the weekend, thinking that everything is difficult, that everything has to be fought for, that there are things conspiring to hold you back, and you may be of a view that there's no such thing as reasonable effort. You have to either do nothing and just accept the situation, or instead use incredible force. But in spite of that view, you think Mars conjunct Uranus might be about incredible force, but it needn't be, not at all. It's just about being very clear about what it is that you want. There are definitely things that you do want, and I think that you can get hold of them. And if you want to follow a particular ambition, then over the weekend, I think that you can do so with really, a considerable amount of success. And on Sunday, we have got a semi-sextile between Mercury and Venus, and this semi-sextile is potentially a bit stressful. Mercury semi-sextile Venus could be about you coming across something that you find annoying. Maybe you come across a person that you find annoying, something or somebody that you don't really want to deal with, and you might potentially just say the wrong thing, or just feel completely uneasy. You might assume that another person is trying to hold you back. But this Mercury semi-sextile Venus may actually be beneficial, provided you're quite mature about it. It just could be about two principles that you're trying to bring together, that you can bring together. And it's about you being true to yourself, but also being accepting of another person, and perhaps what another person has to offer, what they're bringing to the table. Maybe it's also being appreciative of another person's creativity. Yeah, it's okay to be appreciative. It's okay to tell someone they're wonderful. Well, okay, you've got to be honest, but I think that you do listen to what people are doing, or at least what they're saying, and look at what they've got to offer, because it might be important, and it might be something that you might be able to benefit from. And I've talked about Mars conjunct Uranus, but Mars is not just conjunct Uranus. It is making a trine to Pluto, and by Sunday, that Mars Pluto conjunction is exact. And when you've got Mars in Gemini trine Pluto in Aquarius, this really does indicate that you can move forward, maybe in quite a dramatic way. And you kind of might assume that there's going to be a big obstacle, there's going to be resistance, but once you've made a decision, once you've made your mind up about something, you've decided to go for it, then I just don't think that anything's going to really get in your way. So do have confidence, do have belief in yourself. Things might not be as difficult as you had imagined. Cancer. The moon is moving through Pisces, all weekend, and moon in Pisces, that's a good sign for the moon to be in. I mean, not as good as it used to be, because the last time that the moon was in Pisces, Jupiter was in Cancer. In other words, moon and Jupiter were in mutual reception, but I'm afraid now Jupiter is in Leo, so we've lost that mutual reception. But still, with moon in Pisces, I think that this aspect allows you to get get some perspective, and you don't have to restrict yourself to anything. And in fact, the more open-minded you can be, the better. So give things a go. Be prepared to do some exploration, and don't worry if something doesn't immediately make sense. It might make sense at a later stage. And if you find yourself moving onto sort of unfamiliar territory, that mightn't be such a bad thing. There's always space for learning, for gaining from a new experience. Okay, I understand that Cancerians value their own security, but I think you're secure enough. I don't think you need to worry about any loss of security. You're fine, and in fact, by looking at things in a new way, you may be able to redefine what it means to be secure, and perhaps you're going to start to tune into something sort of higher from yourself that might, at some level, be looking after you. And the moon doesn't just make a conjunction to the North Node; it also makes a trine to the Sun. So that is quite a major aspect. It's certainly a major fortunate aspect. Moon in Pisces, trine Sun in Cancer. I think Cancer, that is going to really make you feel comfortable. It'll make you feel good about yourself. You'll just realize that you are in the right place, and that there's no need to struggle, no need to strive excessively, because things are coming together. In the end. Now, that doesn't mean to say that everything is going to be entirely straightforward. All weekend long. I mean, we know that there is an exact Mars-Uranus conjunction over the weekend. At least it's it's exact on Saturday, actually. So for all of us, regardless of our sign, that Mars-Saturn conjunction could be stressful at times. It could be about things happening, unexpectedly. We thought everything was fine, then suddenly we have to deal with a new reality. Someone might say something or do something, or maybe not turn up. I mean, that might be the nature of Mars conjunct Uranus. But then we have got the moon making a square to Uranus and making a square to Mars on Saturday. And this square is important for you, Cancer, because obviously the moon is your ruler. So it might be that something appears to happen, or you might have a realization which, in the first instance, seems quite stressful. You thought you'd sorted everything out, and then something suddenly occurs to you, or you respond to something you see or something you experience in quite a radical way, and you're perhaps even surprised by the strength of your response. But just because you respond powerfully to something doesn't necessarily mean that you're dealing with a major obstacle, or there's any great need to panic. It just might be your first reaction. It's rather like with the I Ching. One of the hexagrams in the I Ching is hexagram number 51, which is about thunder. And it seems when the thunder strikes that it's really dramatic, that it's almost disastrous, because it seems that everything has gone wrong, but suddenly things have gone against you. And what the I Ching does say is that in spite of the thunder, in spite of the unexpected, it's going to be okay. You can just continue with what you are doing. You don't have to interrupt your routines and your rituals. You can just carry on. And sure, you can be aware of a new reality, but it doesn't mean to say that everything has to be turned upside down, that you have to start again, that things get wrecked and destroyed. It's not like that. And so if there is some turbulence this weekend, particularly at the beginning of a weekend, don't panic. Just sort of roll with it. Perhaps use your Cancerian sensitivity to understand what's going on, and then I think things will quickly resolve, because once the moon has finished making a square to Uranus and Mars, it moves on and makes that trine to the sun, and I think that trine can really settle things down. Leo. The sun is your ruler, of course, and the sun is in Cancer. Of course, the sun is in Cancer. We know the sun. We know that the sun is in Cancer, and this weekend it just might feel particularly clear that the sun is in Cancer. I mean, from a Leo perspective. So when you think about the sign Cancer, you might be thinking of the crab. The crab likes to protect itself. It has that shell, and from a Leo perspective, when you've got this placement, you don't want to be directly involved with things. You'd prefer to wait. Maybe you want to just wait for the sun to move into Leo, whenever that is. What is it, July? I haven't looked it up. Something like July the 22nd, 23rd, whenever. When the sun moves into Leo, you're going to feel a whole lot better, and you're going to be ready to, take on the world and win. But, for the moment, with the sun in Cancer, with the sun, not just the sun in Cancer, but the sun making a square to Saturn. Because we've got Saturn in Aries, and the sun making that square to Saturn is potentially a problem aspect. And this square between Sun and Saturn, I think it's exact sort of on Monday morning, but through the weekend the sun is getting closer and closer to that square, and you just might feel that something is just holding you back. It could be another person, someone who might be a bit of an authority figure, a person you might respect or sort of even fear, and you might kind of assume that they're right, you're wrong, that somehow you just have to pay them respect, but it does kind of cramp your style. And it's kind of not really what you wanted, and just so the question is, what do you do about it? Well, ask yourself who you're having to deal with over the weekend and into the beginning of next week. There may be some people out there who are completely unhelpful. They may even undermine your confidence. In which case, you could argue that the less you have to do with them, the better. But it's possible that you can benefit from that Saturn figure. I mean, Saturn could represent someone who is wise and can be trusted, and they might be critical, but I think that their criticism might be meant in the best possible way. So you've got to kind of use your judgment here and ask yourself which people you should trust to look after your own best interests. And maybe there are just some people who just like you to sort of feel small just for the sake of it, and so carefully consider other people's motivations. And in terms of relationships, this Sun square Saturn could potentially be a problem. It just might be that someone is just not on your wavelength. Maybe they were on your wavelength quite recently, but now with this Sun square Saturn, they just might be sort of more trouble than they're worth, at least in the short term. I mean, as you move into next week, by I don't know, the middle of next week, the sun square Saturn will be losing some of its power. So it might be, if you're in a relationship, that you want to stay away from your partner temporarily, while this sun square Saturn is causing problems, and it perhaps also reinforces your idea that maybe it was just best if you are left alone, that you don't feel that you have to spend too much time with any one person, and interaction over the weekend could be voluntary, especially as the moon is in Pisces as well. And so with the moon in Pisces, Leo, I think that you might be more emotional than usual, and there's nothing wrong with that, because we've got a conjunction between the moon and the North Node in Pisces. So if you are sensitive and you try to understand the emotional dimension, then that is the right thing to do. In fact, the more sensitive you can be, arguably, the better, because you are understanding what is going on around you. You're understanding, what other people are feeling, other people's motivations, and if something feels wrong, then it probably is wrong. And so, Leo, you have the opportunity here to sort of position yourself in the right way. Now, I don't want to, give the impression that this weekend is just bad news. It's not. Okay, the Sun might be making a square to Saturn, but we've also got a trine between the Moon and the Sun, and we've got the Moon in Pisces trine the Sun in Cancer, and this aspect really does emphasize the reflective side, and it just could be that when you are alone, or when you're somewhere that you just you feel safe and you feel looked after, then you're going to be on good form. And once you get in touch with your feelings, and there's no disturbances, you don't have to worry too much about what other people are doing, you don't have to worry about other people's vibes, then you're going to feel that things really are moving, and you're going to feel that your own life force is stronger than usual. So that moon trine the Sun could really make the weekend, and so there is an opportunity for you to really utilize the energies of the weekend. But I think in most cases, it should be done, on your terms. Virgo. In some respects, Virgo, you might be rather extreme this weekend. You don't really want to sort of sit in the middle of things, you be sort of non-committal. That's not really how you feel, even though Mercury is retrograde. I know that supposedly when Mercury is retrograde, people aren't very decisive. They change their mind. They put things on hold. You don't want to commit. That's all true to an extent, but I think it is an overgeneralization. And right now, Virgo, as far as you're concerned, things are serious, and things need to be done. They need to be done properly. And once you do something, part of you is just going to feel that you need to go all the way. Especially on Saturday, because on Saturday we have a conjunction between Mars and Uranus. Of course, this Mars-Uranus conjunction has been forming for some time, and it has been getting very close over the last few days. But Saturday, it's there. It's Mars and Uranus are really at maximum power, and don't forget, Mars and Uranus are in Gemini. It's in a mutable sign. It's in a sign that is the top of your chart, Gemini, and so that might mean that many Virgos feel that there are just things you want to do, things you want to accomplish, and you want to just do it as well as is possible. You don't want to compromise. And once you've decided you want something, you really want to just give it everything you've got. You're not going to be satisfied, with second best. And perhaps you take the view that you can't, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. And so if you've got it into your head that you really want to do something, then I think you're quite ready to do whatever it takes. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends on the situation. You've got to use your judgment. But with this attitude, there just might be something about you that is sort of a bit separate from everything else that's going on around you. And that might especially be the case if you're in the United States. Of course, it's the July the 4th weekend, 250th anniversary and all that. But Virgo, are you really going to want to completely immerse yourself in the event? Probably not, because as far as you're concerned, there are other things that need to be thought about, and other things to do, things that are really important. What is important, and as far as you're concerned, your interests are the things that matter. That's fine. You don't want to take things too far. The North Node is still in Pisces. Okay, it's going to move into Aquarius pretty quickly, but with the North Node still in Pisces, with the Moon in Pisces, you have to pay some attention to other people and other people's needs. Because, if you don't, you could actually be making things more complicated for yourself. So, what's happening is, the Moon, in Pisces, is making a square to Mars and Uranus. And that takes place on Saturday. And so with that square, you might find that your ideas, your plans, and other people's plans are at odds with one another. And that could lead to a bit of a deadlock. And you might then feel that you've just got to go your way, and you don't care about what other people are doing, what other people are saying. But I think, Virgo, you have to be reasonable. You have to make an effort to listen to what people are saying, understand what they're doing, and also understand their priorities. Just because you understand someone's priorities, or you make the effort to understand someone's priorities, doesn't mean to say that you're giving anything away. Instead, you're showing some empathy, you're showing some reasonableness, and when you've considered all possibilities, when you consider the overall situation, you might still decide that you want to follow your own path, but you will at least be following your own path with a knowledge of what you are doing, and maybe you can find the right compromise. Maybe you can pay attention to other people, give people what they're looking for, come over as being a caring and compassionate person, and at the same time do what it is that you need to do. And I think it is possible. So although this weekend I think you are something of an extremist, you don't necessarily have to be an extremist. And don't forget, with Mars and Uranus and Gemini, Gemini is a double-bodied sign. You can do two things at once. You can be reasonable, and you can be selfish, or at least you can put your own interests first. But you can do it all at the same time. And if you play it right, then I don't see any reason why there should be any resistance. And you might think there's going to be resistance. You might think you have to use maximum force, but actually I don't think you do if you adopt the right approach. Libra. The Sun is, of course, still moving through Cancer, and the Sun in Cancer does make a couple of aspects. It makes a square to Saturn. And, this square to Saturn is exact on Monday, I think, but it's still close, all weekend. And the moon is also making a trine to the sun. But as far as this Sun-Saturn square is concerned, you might conceptualize Saturn as being another person, someone you have to deal with, and we could then see the Sun in Cancer as being, whatever it is that you are trying to do, and Saturn just might be in your way. You might feel that there are certain other people who are just holding you back. Their mere presence is an affront to your individuality, and that certainly might be your view. You might also be of a view that there's nothing you can do about the situation, that you've got to put other people first. It's easy to think that. It might not seem easy, but sometimes the easiest thing is to just accept that other people are holding the cards and just do things their way, and just that way you'll maintain the equilibrium, and we won't have you have too many problems. But I'm not sure if that's really the right approach, and we might want to sort of start playing with the Saturn symbolism. Saturn is square the Sun. Saturn is a planet that's exalted in Libra. Maybe just Saturn represents you, and rather than you thinking that someone else is holding you back, instead consider the possibility that you can make a supreme effort to understand other people, to understand what makes them tick, to look at things from their perspective. And once you're able to do that, then you can certainly be reasonable, but you can also perhaps look after your own interests. And so that Sun square Saturn needn't be about sacrifice, about you having to just accept that other people need to be paid attention to, accept that you have to sort of give up some of your plans, maybe all of your plans. You don't have to do that. You just have to be aware of how other people are thinking and are feeling, get an idea about what is important to them. That's can be quite sort of a Libran thing to do. Librans, they understand the social environment. And why do they understand the social environment? Very often so that they can take control. And so it's not such a bad thing to listen. And then we don't just have the Sun square Saturn. We also have the Moon trine the Sun, and with the Moon trine the Sun, this is suggesting, Libra, that there is always a way of doing things. Always. It's really about method. So if you think perhaps that you're being blocked, what might be being blocked is just a particular approach. And in fact, you've got loads of different approaches available to you. And so, you just decide, which one to go, which one is most appropriate. So it could be that you're kind of dealing with a social toolbox. Perhaps every Libran has a social toolbox. You have to handle other people, but different people at different times require different approaches. So, sometimes it's best to be conciliatory. Other times it's best to be threatening. Other times you come over as being happy-go-lucky. Whatever's needed to get your way. And so if you can take such an approach, being socially flexible, then I think Libra, in most cases, you are going to be able to make progress. And don't be afraid. Some Librans just might feel concerned. They might feel that if they stand up for themselves, then there might be some sort of bad consequence. You never know what it might be. It's some sort of undefined bad consequence. If you were to just let go and follow your heart, well, something might happen, but I don't think anything will happen, and I think it's important, therefore, that you believe in yourself, and at the same time that you make the most of your social skills. I think your social skills right now, can be really, really very good, and in the end, I think everyone can be happy, including you. Scorpio. Mars is now exactly conjunct Uranus. Well, on Saturday, Mars is exactly conjunct Uranus, and this aspect, has been building up for some time. And in astrology, it's often the case that an aspect just becomes more difficult as it becomes closer and closer and closer. You start to see the friction, you start to see the problems, you experience the worries and everything else. But then, when the aspect just becomes exact, there's almost like a moment of calm. You perhaps understand what's going on, you understand what it was all about, and things just seem just not so difficult. And maybe that's what's going on with Mars conjunct Uranus. Over the last few days, there could have been moments of real tension or sort of anxiety. You didn't know what was going to happen next, but then suddenly things start to calm down. One reason they might have started to calm down is that the moon changed signs. So the moon, as you moved into the weekend, was in Aquarius, and moon in Aquarius, maybe wasn't great. And perhaps the problem with moon in Aquarius is that you were just focusing a little too much on yourself and your own needs, your own interests, your own security concerns, and this might have made you feel rather self-conscious. And then the moon moved into Pisces, and so moon moves into Pisces 7:30 a.m. London time on Saturday morning. So that's much earlier on Saturday if you're in the Americas. So if you're in the Americas and Europe, Africa, then first part of Saturday, moon moves into Pisces. Moon moves into a sign, which is of course watery. It's a sign that Scorpio has a good understanding of. It's in a way less complicated from the moon in Aquarius, and when that happens, you start to get a perspective on Mars and Uranus. It's not about tension. It's about just knowing that there are certain things you can do, and it may be that just having the knowledge that you are free, that you can be free, that you can do what you want is enough. It's not like that you necessarily have to actually do something, but you just know that you could do something if you wanted to do it. You've always got that freedom, and so with that freedom, you're just feeling you're feeling good about yourself, and you're just aware that there are some sort of real possibilities. And then as you move into Sunday, Mars is making a sextile to Neptune, and it's also making a trine to Pluto. And so really we've got Mars hitting all of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. And this might encourage you, Scorpio, to move in some sort of unusual directions, to assert yourself in ways that you hadn't necessarily expected. And there are things that you just might want to put a huge amount of energy into. You just want things to be resolved, and you want things to be understood. And I think, Scorpio, you have an ability to really get into things, really, very deeply. It's not superficial, and so the more you can understand something, the better. And so that might be the best way of handling the weekend. But do you really have to handle the weekend? As I said, the moon is in Pisces, and the moon is making a conjunction to the North Node, and so with the moon making a conjunction to the North Node, and the moon is making a trine to the Sun. Once you really get into that moon conjunct the North Node, moving towards a conjunct to sorry, did I say the conjunction of the Sun? I mean trine the Sun. So the moon, when it makes a trine to the Sun, just things can actually work very well. They can work well on an emotional level, but also in terms of you appreciating that there's just more to everything. You just don't have to look at everything on face value. There are sort of maybe hidden depths and subtleties that are out there for you to understand. And it's just very important that you do what you do what you feel is right. It's certainly not a time to be following the crowd. And if it feels right, it probably is right. And at some level, I think you have the opportunity to transcend, not just because that moon is trine the Sun, but also because Mars, your ruler, is making a trine to Pluto. And so that Mars trine Pluto, well, it could be, Scorpio, that you get into something very deeply. Perhaps you're getting into something relating to the past or your memories, going deeply into something, and you go as deeply as you can, and then you kind of go in the opposite direction. You're able to rise above things because you've gone into the depths, so that you can understand things, and then you're able to sort of move forward, feeling really good about yourself. And in this way, with Mars trine Pluto, there could be a feeling of transformation in that Scorpio kind of way. Scorpio, you think about shedding one's skin. The old has gone, and now you're aware of something new. And it's like what I was saying with that Mars conjunct Uranus. It might be a bit tense as you approach that aspect, but as the aspect becomes exact with the moon in Pisces, then you start to get a real sense of your, not just of your own freedom, but of just something new and fresh, and that you can sort of move on from the past and all its problems. Sagittarius. This weekend, Sagittarius, you might be inclined not to do very much. I mean, the moon is in Pisces, and with the moon in Pisces, you might just feel that there are things you just want to experience in actually a fairly sort of passive way, not bringing in your own material, not feeling you have to say anything, not feeling you have to necessarily be super inspired, just being yourself in your own way. And I know that Jupiter is now in Leo, and with Jupiter in Leo, there is a lot of excitement. Jupiter in a fire sign, all these things that you know are possible. But this weekend, you can perhaps leave Jupiter outside the room. maybe you don't have to get too caught up with whatever Jupiter's doing. And so that Jupiter energy, in fact, Sagittarius, is just temporarily rather disconnected, and because of that, I just don't think that you're necessarily going to feel that there is anything that you necessarily want to do in a concrete sense. And so there is something reflective about today, and that I think is the right thing to do. I think maybe you need to just pause think about things, think about what's happened, over the last few days, get a perspective, and just not allow yourself to be pressurized. Yeah, I mean, I think there could be some pressure. I mean, the moon in Pisces is making a square to Mars, square to Uranus on Saturday, and so that could be about, someone bothering you, someone trying to spur you into action. But you can listen, but I don't think that you have to. I don't think that you have to respond, and it just may be a case, Sagittarius, of maybe letting people do their own thing and just not allowing them to disturb your peace of mind. I mean, I understand that this is not a typically Sagittarius weekend, but you can't be a super extroverted Sagittarius, every day, all day, every week, every year. Sometimes you need to just step back from it all, and I think that that is the right approach. And the moon in Pisces is making a trine to the sun, and this trine to the sun on Sunday is. I think it's on Sunday. It kind of might depend on your time zone, but regardless, the moon and the sun are in a trine relationship. Moon in Pisces, sun in Cancer, and so you can tune into that, and you can just feel part of something without feeling that you have to contribute anything positive. Now, all of this might sound rather boring. Maybe you're looking for excitement, but I don't think you need excitement. You've kind of got excitement if you want it. Sure, you can I don't know, you can get involved with other people, you can get involved with other people's fun and games, you can allow other people to destabilize you. Certain people could be destabilizing if you let them, but I don't think you're going to want to let them. And so you've got a choice, and I think you're going to just do things your way. And I think the quiet path for the moment is the right path. Capricorn. On paper, it's an exciting, even dramatic weekend. After all, we have got this conjunction between Mars and Uranus. It really should stir things up. When you think about Mars-Uranus, you think about this rather explosive energy, and it could be, really, very disruptive and exciting. But do you have to participate in this? And I think the answer is probably not. It might be something that you are aware of. There's this potential for excitement. There's a potential for turmoil as well. But I think, the average Capricorn should be able to create a certain amount of distance between themselves and the action, if you want. I mean, sure, you can always move towards the action. You can get the ringside seat if that's what you really want. But I don't think that's necessarily what you are going to want. I mean, you are a Capricorn, sensible Capricorn. Stay out of trouble, and if you want to stay out of trouble, you certainly can. And you think about what you are representing. You can be yourself, and if you are yourself, without trying, there's just something about you that is interesting, that is attractive, and also quite dynamic. And so you perhaps represent sort of a constant and calming influence that other people will appreciate. And by keeping a distance from the turmoil, that means in a way that you're almost not sullied by it. because if you're part of the action, if you're right in the thick of things, can you be useful to anyone? Because you're so wrapped up in it, you've lost your objectivity, and it's difficult to think straight. And Capricorn, that is not you at the moment. You can take a step back, and you can analyze things. You can certainly analyze what is going on emotionally. I mean, there are emotional currents around which are not caused by you, but other people are generating emotion. They're generating powerful feelings, and you can see it all. You can see how it's all working, and you're not going to get directly involved. And so that means that this weekend, in your own way, I think that you can be fairly detached. But detached, but also interesting. You've always got something to say. You've got some comment that I think that other people are going to be interested in. And as far as excitement is concerned, in one, it's kind of weird, but you want to stay away from the excitement. You don't want to be part of it. But you yourself can seem to an exciting person. When people spend time with you, they feel in some ways sort of enlightened. That they are sort of part of the action, and that you are sort of creating the action, even though you're not creating the action at all. So that is a good position to be in. And that does mean that other people are going to like you. I think broadly speaking, relationships should work quite well. I mean, I don't think there's anything going to be especially dramatic, at least not from your end. Okay, the moon is making a square to Saturn and Uranus. Okay, that's something that perhaps I need to think about. So if the moon is... Okay, sorry, did I say moon is... Sorry, the moon is making a square to Uranus. Sorry, let me say that again. The moon is making a square to Uranus and Mars. So if the moon is making a square to Uranus and Mars on Saturday, that could say something about other people's response, how people are behaving. And there may be certain people who are perhaps behaving in an erratic way. They're exaggerating, and they're just taking things too far. But I think Capricorn, you can be sort of a moderating influence. You can explain things. You can put things in perspective, and so if someone appears to be a little bit crazy to begin with, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think you can trust yourself to be a calming influence. But as I've already said, you can be an exciting influence as well. You are interesting. You do kind of sort of brighten things up without causing a forest fire. It's not like you're setting fire to anything. In fact, you can bring things under control. And towards the end of the weekend, we do have a square between the Sun and Saturn. And of course, Saturn is your ruler. The Sun is moving through Cancer, your opposite sign. And okay, I think that continues on the theme of relationships. You can certainly bring someone under control. You can even bring someone down to earth if need be, but you don't want to exaggerate. I mean, being a Capricorn, once you once you start to assert yourself, there are no limits. You can change you can change the environment, you can change the atmosphere, and sure, you can be exciting, but you can also be the opposite. You can really close things down. And the question is, to what extent do you want to close things down? So, at the end of the weekend, do think about what kind of impact you are having on other people with that Sun square Saturn. And you don't want to go too far. And if you want to express your opinions, you want to give an opinion on what someone else is doing, ask yourself whether you're being reasonable. I mean, you don't want to criticize people for the sake of it. You only want to criticize someone if you've got very good reason. Aquarius. I was talking to Capricorn just now, and I was mentioning to Capricorn that there is a square between the Sun and Saturn forming. And, Aquarius, like Capricorn, is a Saturn-ruled sign. And so, this Sun square Saturn is likely to have an impact on you too. And, the Sun is ruler of Leo, your opposite sign. So the ruler of your first house, or maybe your solar first house, if you're looking at it from a perspective of the sun signs, or your ascendant, is of course going to be Saturn, and then the opposite sign is Aquarius. Leo is the opposite sign. Let me get this straight. Leo is the opposite sign to Aquarius. So the rulers of the two are square each other. So with Sun square Saturn, or at least Sun applying to a square of Saturn, this might mean that certain relationships might be under a degree of pressure. That's because Sun square Saturn, the square is as William Lilly said that he when he distinguished between a square and an opposition. A square is perfect enmity, an opposition is perfect hatred. So we're not in the hatred zone. But with enmity, there just could be a certain disagreement here. That you and that other person may not see eye to eye, and you might clash. Perhaps you have different priorities, different interests, and that's just the way it is. So maybe if a relationship is important to you, you should be careful what you say, or you should de-emphasize relationships over the weekend. And it could be that you have got advice to give, you've got suggestions, and someone else is trying to do things their way. They've got ideas about the way things should work, and you might want to comment. And so if you comment on what another person is doing, it's possible that your comment is not regarded as being very helpful. And I think, Aquarius, you have to remember that different people have different approaches. And it could be very trivial. It could be that someone is doing something, maybe about the house, or they've got an idea about how something should be ordered. Maybe they've got an idea about, I don't know, how a dishwasher should be filled, and something apparently trivial. But you might have other ideas. I read somewhere that dishwashers and how dishwashers are filled is a major source of domestic argument and dispute. That's kind of interesting. Something as apparently trivial as filling in a dishwasher, but there are certain approaches to filling in a dishwasher that can really clash. I'm not saying it's going to be about dishwashers, but it just could be two people having different views about how something routine and trivial should be performed. So, I'm sorry to be sort of negative. It's just a potential there, and so from your perspective, I would not pass judgment on how someone is carrying out their business. Even if you regard it as being important, really avoid making critical comment unless you think that it really is important. And through the weekend we do have the moon moving through Pisces, and with the moon in Pisces conjunct the North Node, it could be that there could be times over the course of a weekend where things relating to money and finance and possessions, come to the fore, and that might lead to words. Could even lead to a disagreement. It could. I mean, the moon is making a square to Uranus, a square to Mars on Saturday. And so, Aquarius, if you're discussing money with another person, even if you care about this person, money might be the source of some kind of disagreement. So perhaps financial matters should be avoided as far as is possible, and maybe there are other things to concentrate on. Of course, if someone is spending a lot of money in a careless way, well, then you've got to say something. Because otherwise things could get out of control. But I should say to balance all of that, to perhaps balance some of that negativity, I think that in general, Aquarius, there is something about you that is quite charming, and I think that provided you don't say too much, provided you're not too critical, you can actually come over as being being quite sort of attractive, and I think that people are going to like you, and they're going to regard you as being quite appealing. So that suggests that from a social perspective, it can be quite a successful weekend, provided you you don't take things too far, and also don't feel that you have to necessarily always be participating in things. Though one can't avoid the fact that Mars is making a trine to Pluto. Pluto is, of course, moving through Aquarius, your sign. So with Mars trine Pluto, although you might not feel like having too much of an influence on other people, if you want to have an influence, then I think you can. Mars trine Pluto is potentially quite a powerful aspect, and you know how to express yourself, and if you really want to push your point, you feel that you want to have an influence, then Aquarius, I don't think that should be a problem, and I think that you'll be helped also by your charm and attractiveness. Pisces, moon is in your sign all weekend long, and the moon is making a conjunction to the North Node, and it's making a trine to the Sun. So on Sunday, I think it's Sunday, the moon makes a trine to the Sun, and so having the moon in Pisces, it's always good to have the moon in this sign, and it allows you to be yourself, and also to be emotionally responsive to whatever's going on around you, and so you can enjoy yourself, but also enjoy yourself in a way that is sensitive. It's not like sort of the kind of enjoyment where you're so wrapped up in yourself that you forget what's going on around you. You forget other people's needs, other people's sensitivities. No, you'll be able to pick up on it all, and through your own actions and suggestions, you can ensure that maybe everyone has a good time. So if there are moments of boredom where people don't know what to do with themselves, then I think that you can come up with some good ideas. And, okay, it's not about a lot of talking. I just think that you can help everyone just get into the swing of things, whatever you're trying to get into the swing of. But so that does look pretty good. But there just may still be some moments, particularly on Saturday, where things aren't necessarily very easy, because if we track this through, we've got the moon moves into Pisces. That's great on Saturday morning. In fact, it might even be late on Friday if you're in California or Hawaii or Alaska. So the moon goes into Pisces. That's great. Then on Saturday, the moon makes a square to Uranus and a square to Mars. Now, those two squares could be difficult on Saturday, and it just might be that something is bothering you. Something seems to be interfering with the flow. Maybe you have to pay attention to something unexpected. I mean, Mars and Uranus. I mean, we have got an exact Mars-Uranus conjunction this weekend on Saturday, and it might be something to do with your family or your home, or something going on that you hadn't expected, you hadn't anticipated. You have to focus on it, and it is irritating, and it might feel for a short period of time that everything is coming to a standstill and you don't know how to handle things. But then the moon moves on, it finishes making the square to Uranus and Mars, and it moves on towards that trine to the Sun. And that trine to the Sun really does allow things to move, especially on an emotional level. And so that's why I said that as far as other people are concerned, you can be a really sort of constructive influence, and I think you can help people enjoy the weekend. So overall, I think it looks like being a good weekend. But if you do run into some flack on Saturday, don't take it too seriously. Just go with it, and you'll find a solution, and then things should start to run pretty well. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at the weekend in terms of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 20. Contemplation. So if you look at this hexagram, you see a sort of tower-shaped object. I mean, you could see it as like a tower, sort of a primitive tower, kind of rather like those sort of Stonehenge blocks, two stones next to each other, and then you put another stone on top. And the idea with this tower might be that you climb to the top of it, and when you're on top of the tower, you get to see. You can see all around you, and you can see what's going on. You don't have to do anything. You're just observing. How are people behaving? Are there any dangers ahead? Of course, that's the advantage of a tower. If you're worried about a conquest, as in ancient China, I think this might have been a constant problem. So you get to see, and the important point is not to act, but the question is, how good is your view? And we have the second line moving, and what the second line is about is, it's certainly of a view, but it's talking about the view of a crack in the door. So you just open the door a bit, you can see through that crack. You can see out, but you can't see everything. It's a very limited view. And the I Ching is not saying it's necessarily a bad thing to have a limited view, but it kind of depends on who you are. And here we have the problem of the I Ching. And the problem of the I Ching perhaps is that it is very traditional, and it is sort of based around the Confucian order, and there are certainly sort of big sort of gender distinctions. There's what is appropriate for the woman to do, what is appropriate for the man to do. So in I Ching language, so I must make it clear, I'm not saying this is the case or should be the case. I'm just trying to sort of tell you how the I Ching is seeing this. And so it being a traditionally Confucian oracle is distinguishing between men and women, between the woman who stays at home and has to look after the house, and the man who presumably has to go out and work and so forth. And the I Ching is saying, well, it's appropriate for the woman to just look through the crack in the door, get a kind of a limited view of her environment, but it's not appropriate for the man, because the man needs to be going out there and he needs to absolutely sort of understand everything. So we have to kind of translate that into a sort of a modern situation, which isn't so gendered. And so the question is, how much do you need to see? Because with this second line, it really does seem that there is a limited view. You're not seeing the big picture, and the whole point of this hexagram contemplation was to see the big picture. It's all about being on top of the tower, understanding how everything works, how everything is about to develop, being able to potentially see the invading armies. And if you're only getting an incomplete view when you need to have a full view, then you need to do something about that. And it perhaps relates to the situation. Sometimes you can know too much, regardless of one's gender. There can be a lot of irrelevant information, or information that you can't take advantage of, and so seeing too much is just clutter. So that's one way of looking at it. But very often you do need to be able to see as much as possible. So you've got to decide how much you need to know. But I think that there is a place for contemplation. There is a place for just observing everything, because there is this question: how is it going to develop? What is going to happen next? And what is going to happen next is there could be a storm, a metaphorical storm, at least, because the second hexagram is hexagram number 59, which is dispersion. Dispersion represents the rains. The storm comes, and the storm, seems really, really dramatic. This is the kind of storm that just clears everything away, and it's kind of like being in a washing machine. Things just move. We're just moving all the time. We're being churned, and it just might seem that we're in a process of completely disintegrating. But the I Ching sees the storm, the dispersion of the storm, as being pretty positive, because it moves us on. It sweeps away the past and allows us to move on quickly. And so perhaps we get the idea here in terms of this weekend. It starts off with contemplation. We're trying to understand what's going on. Maybe we can see the clouds coming. We can see that things are going to change, that things are going to be turned upside down. And we shouldn't forget that there's a Mars-Uranus conjunction this weekend. And so I know that the Mars-Uranus conjunction isn't quite about a storm, but it is about turmoil. But perhaps we can see the turmoil moving in, and then it happens. And here's the dispersion. And yeah, everything gets thrown all over the place. And then everything calms down. The storm settles, and we may find that we're somewhere completely different. We may have moved on. We may have made some progress. And so, yeah, perhaps we're getting an idea about this Mars-Uranus conjunction. It's just, things getting turned upside down, things changing, and then the dust settles, and things are easier, things are clearer, and we might, to our surprise, find that we have made some progress. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoy. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you're in the US, happy 4th of July. And if you have enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like and subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.